Welcome back. This is Drive Print Technical Certification for Toshiba, Lesson 2C. And what we're going to go over here is the auto setup feature. So in previous versions you had to manually type in the IP address and set up the printer. But here we've actually set up a full auto search and auto setup section here for Drive Print. So it's right up here on the left in setup. And what I can do is I can select the network adapter here. Here it's 10.0.1.18, and you'll see there I get the IP or the subnet, and if it's set to 0 at the end and I click detect printers there, what it's going to do is it's going to search every device on my subnet and it'll bring me back the printer, all the matches. So there I have one printer on my subnet. That'll only work if it's on your subnet. If it's on a different one, then you need to actually type in the IP address here. And it will work the same way. It'll just search for that specific IP. So you can also say that you only want to find, for instance, a Toshiba device if you have a lot of printers and things on the network. So you'll see that right here it's matched. So I have the description, everything's okay. It gives me the eStudio 306. I can change the printer name here also, so I could say it's in the demo room. And I get the new device detected. What it does there actually is it finds the name of the printer and it'll try to match up the driver. We have a list stored of all the available drivers. So if you don't get the correct match and it says no driver detected over here, if you hold your mouse over it, it'll tell you what driver you should install. But a good bet is always the Toshiba Universal driver. That one always works well. So if I click Setup Devices there, it's going to prompt me with this pop-up, and what that tells me is that I need to do two things possibly. One is that I need to set the home screen in Top Access to always come up, which is this 08 code here. The other one, if I have a card reader, is that I need to set that card reader value to the correct type of card. If you click More Info, it'll take you to an FAQ and you can get a list of the types of cards and things, but you should be familiar with this if you've set either of those things up before. The reason why we need to prompt that home screen is so that we can do the billing, so we can prompt the user for the billing codes, and also so that if a user swipes a card that hasn't yet been registered, we can give them the authentication screen to register their card. So this is going to pop up every time, and I'm just going to click OK there and let it go ahead, and you see that the wheel is spinning. It has found a new device. It's going to configure the Windows queue. What that means is that it's actually setting up a local printer here with the Drive port, and then it's going to go ahead and configure the EWB application. So it'll actually go in and set all the settings in Top Access that are needed. It'll turn on LDAP authentication, it'll set all the URLs, and it'll register them. If I show you right here, it has created already a couple printers, one for the conversion, one for that printer that we just set up, and one for the My queue, which is the hold queue. If I look at this printer that's set up right there, and I go to the printer properties, you'll see that there's a port set up, and it's actually the Drive print port. So what this means is that when Drive calls that printer and rasterizes the document, it actually gets it back at the end so that we can dispatch it directly to the printer ourselves. So we don't actually use the spooler to send the file, which keeps us from having spooler crashes. It lets us print the file a little faster, so the job's just being sent right to RAW 9100. We're not going through the spooler. It also gives us a little more control over the reporting. So every time you set up a printer, it'll set up a direct target there for you, which you could share out so that people, if they wanted to print directly to that printer, they should use this one, not a local printer that they create. And also there, the My queue, if you look at the printer properties, it is set to the hold queue. So what that means is if I print to it, it'll be in my hold queue, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So if I go back, everything went okay, and you see that the printer is configured. So if I go down to the left to printers, I see that printer that I set up. I could give it another name. You see here, demo room. I have the IP address. It got back the serial number. Set it as a Toshiba. And if I go into the authentication, this should all be set up for you. You could set it to auto release all if you wanted all the jobs to print out as soon as they swipe their card. Drive print only would be if you're only using the pull print application, not the authentication. Some fields here that are sort of relevant is the initial screen. You can set it to go to a specific app afterwards. I think there's only a couple possibilities there. But all those should be set up for you for the Toshiba automatically. Also for advanced, that is the type of files that the Toshiba can just print on its own that we don't need to convert. In the case of authentication, it's good just to leave it as it is, but if you're doing just mobile printing, you can speed it up by setting PDF and JPEG in this list. So that's pretty easy. It's set up now. If I go to top access for that device, you'll see that there's a couple things that it did. It went ahead and turned on, let me log back in. It went ahead and turned on LDAP authentication. So you see there the LDAP server is set for Drive. It set all of the EWB apps and the URLs correctly with the correct format based off the IP address that the server has. So if I go to EWB here, you'll see that they're all set up for me already. I don't need to do anything. They're set up as a URL list for the menu screen. It's all done for me. If I go to security, you see that user authentication is turned on. It's pointed to the Drive LDAP server that it set up, and it also sets up all the fields correctly. We do not enable PIN by default, but if you wanted to turn on PIN, you can enable it manually, point it to the Drive server, and it would need to be login, and then actually this is the shortcode field. You can always go to Drivve.com and find an FAQ for PIN if you forget how to do that. It's up there. Also on some of the newer machines, there's a separate section here for the card field, and that card field would actually be card ID is what you would put in here, and it matches it up directly when you swipe the card. Again, you can look at Drivve.com, just search for card and Toshiba, and you'll see how to do that. But other than that, everything is pretty much set up for you. So now I've brought in the users. I've set the 08 card so that they can swipe their card and register their cards. And also all those apps have been set up for me. So now if they go into the menu button, they can see their jobs. The authentication is set down for the Toshiba. And also I've enabled single sign-on, so we're actually storing the user's password so that we can pass it over to Drive Image. So it's a pretty basic setup. That's how you set up the devices. One thing to mention is that the auto setup will only set up the functions that are available to us based off the license. So if I didn't have an authentication license and a pull print license, it would only set up that device as a mobile printing target. Same if I only had a pull printing license, it would only set up that EWB app. It would not set up the authentication. So based off the license that you have, it's going to set it up. So if you have the trials for everything, or if you have an NFR, it's going to go and set up the whole kit and caboodle. A nice troubleshooting function here. If something fails while you're setting up the device and it's adding the URLs, most often that's because the firmware is old. Go ahead and update the firmware on the device. But you are also able to use this configure platform button. So if you find that device and you go into authentication, it'll give you all these URLs and you can go put them in on your own. It'll remind you to set those 08 codes, but then also here you can use the register and remove functions. So let's see if I wanted to remove all of those fields from the device, because let's say it's in demo room and it's going out, Drive can actually remove all that for you also. So you see here it's unregistering everything, it's removing all the URLs, it's disabling all the authentication, and then all of a sudden the machine will be back to normal. But on the flip side, you could also register it again, right? So if something went wrong and I wanted to see why it's going wrong or whatever, I can actually just go ahead and register the device on my own. One place where you're going to want to do this is if, for instance, you don't have the driver downloaded or you want to use a specific driver. you can go ahead and add that device from the setup. The printer will be here for you, and then you can pick your own driver that you want to use by the set Windows driver. And once you've done that, then you'll need to manually go in there and configure the platform. But like I said, the universal driver is normally fine. So right now the device is locked down. I have pull printing, and I'm storing the password.